Studying for the PSAT reading section and don't know where to start? Well, here are 5 tips for a higher reading score. Tip number 1 is read your question before you read your passage. Why do we do that? Because we want to read these passages with purpose and not for meaning. So a lot of these words you're not going to understand, but that's okay as long as we know what we're searching for with our question. So let's read our question and see what purpose we're going to be reading this passage with. Which finding, if true, would most directly support the researcher's hypothesis? So we're looking for an answer choice that is pro whatever this researcher's hypothesis is. So now we have a purpose. We are searching for the hypothesis. So let's read through this. In the mountains of Brazil, okay, another mini hint here. You do not have to know how to pronounce difficult words. So I'm going to call this BT and BM. So as I read this passage, I am not going to waste my time trying to pronounce these difficult science words or maybe some names that I don't know how to pronounce. We're going to be in Brazil, so I'm assuming we're going to see some Portuguese names here that I'm not going to probably know how to pronounce. So I am just going to use some initials here. So in the mountains of Brazil, BT and BM, 2 plants in the V family, establish themselves on soilless, nutrient-poor patches of Q rock. Plant ecologists Anna A. and Patricia B.C. used microscopic analysis to determine that the roots of BT and BM, which directly grow into the quartzite, have clusters of fine hairs near the root tip. Further analysis indicated that these hairs secrete both M and citric acids. The researchers hypothesize. Okay, so you'll notice that pretty much none of that is important to me until I see hypothesis. Now, we do need the setup in order to know what this hypothesis means, but my blinkers are turning on when I see that word hypothesize. That the plants depend on dissolving underlying rock with these acids, as the process not only creates channels for continued growth, but also releases phosphates that provide the vital nutrient phosphorus. So, I'm going to write a little annotation for myself. BT and BM need dissolving rock for channels. So something of this nature needs to be what's going to support this hypothesis. So this is my shortened version of this hypothesis. And now I can't really do much on these past looking at the answer choices because I don't know what this finding is going to be, right? So we're going to work through elimination process here. Other species in the V family are found in terrains with more soils but have root structures similar to those of BT and BM. Okay? So I remember specifically seeing that these plants were in soilless, nutrient-poor patches, and that's kind of why they need this underlying rock. So I'm going to say that's going to weaken our hypothesis because we need something that's pro the dissolving rock. Okay, B. Though BT and BM both secrete citric and malic acids, each species produces the acids in different proportions. Okay, that doesn't really strengthen or weaken this because it's just giving them a different amount. So they'll still probably be dissolving, but it's not doing much for this exact hypothesis. The roots of BT and BM carve new entry points into rocks when cracks in the surface are readily available. Okay. So if they're carving new entry points, they're probably using this dissolving rock to get in there because they're not going into the cracks that are already there. So they're using this acid here. That seems pretty viable. Let's just make sure the other one doesn't work. BT and BM thrive even when transferred to surfaces of rocks that do not contain phosphates. Well, that's wrong because the whole point of this hypothesis is for these plants to depend on the dissolving rock so that they create the channels for continued roots and release the phosphates. So we kind of need that relationship between the phosphorus, the phosphates, and the plants. So I'm going to go with C. So much easier when I know that I'm really just focusing on this hypothesis and a tiny little bit of this setup up here. Tip number 2 is use the B prime strategy. So what does that mean? Well, it's a nice little acronym to help you remember how to approach most of these reading questions. B, bypass the answers. So don't look at these answer choices until you're ready. Predict your own answer without looking at the answer choices. Identify a matching answer if one jumps out to you. If one does not jump out to you, eliminate wrong answers with rationale. And lastly, use your scratch paper for any needed notes. Now, The Blue Book software also gives you the chance to annotate, typing your notes on the questions, but I recommend using your scratch paper so you don't have to go back and forth. So let's look at this question. Now remember tip number 1, we're going to read our question first. Which choice completes the text with the most logical word or phrase? Now, as you continue studying for the PSAT and the SAT, you'll notice that question types ask the same question every time. So this question is always going to be a words in context question. So we are going to fill in this blank. So remember, B is bypass. So I'm going to go into elimination mode here. So we are going to fill in this blank. So remember, B is bypass. So I am going to cross out these answer choices so that I'm not tempted to look at them. Now, obviously, on the day of the test, you couldn't necessarily cover them, but make sure you're avoiding looking at them as much as possible as you're reading through this. So let's read through this problem. Italy's coffee culture is renowned around the world for its sophistication, variety, and attention to detail. It is not uncommon in Italy for people to take 2 to 3 trips a day to their favorite cafeteria, and other people are so blank about their coffee that they will frequent only one establishment. So we're looking for a context clue. So I'm going to look through this passage and see which words could help me figure out what could go in the blank. People are so something about their coffee that they will frequent only one establishment. So if someone only frequents one establishment, they're probably picky about their coffee. So yeah, I'm going to go with picky. So now I've predicted my answers and I can identify a matching answer. So I'm going to reveal my answer choices here. So picky does not mean eager. Picky and passionate, I wouldn't say that. Okay, if this were you and you were down to selective and ardent, and maybe you don't know what ardent means, but you know that selective means particular, you're going to be, well, picky, right? So these words match really well. So I'm going to go with that one because it's the one I'm sure matches my answer. If you're between 2 words and one of them is a word you don't know and one of them is a word you do know, start with the word you know and see if it works. Now, if selective didn't work in here, that wouldn't mean I automatically eliminated ardent. Actually, if selective hadn't worked, then I could confidently eliminate it and pick ardent, even if it was a word I didn't know, because I could confidently eliminate 3. Now, I know that ardent means passionate, so I'm going to eliminate it and go for selective. And there you go. Bypass your answers, predict your own answer, identify a matching answer if you can. Usually that means that you predicted the same word in words in context. Eliminate your wrong answers, and all of this that I wrote on my screen here, that's what I would be writing on my scratch paper. The identification of the question problem and the word that I picked to annotate. Now this elimination you can do on Blue Book, as well as highlighting the context clues and obviously selecting your answer. Tip number 3 is skip your notes on rhetorical synthesis questions. So what are rhetorical synthesis questions? Anytime you see this setup while researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes, you can tell yourself, I don't need to waste my time reading this. Why? Because everything you need is in the question paragraph and the answer choices. So let's go ahead and read this question, and we're going to annotate as we go. The student wants to emphasize the distance covered by the Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? So just like the words in context one, this little question here is always going to be the same. So on the day of the test, you don't really have to read that either, once you've figured out that this is the rhetorical synthesis question. So we're trying to emphasize the distance covered by these 2 turnpikes. So we need something that is very much going out of its way to detail the distance of both turnpikes. So let's look through our answer choices, and remember, we're working towards elimination. The 62-mile-long Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike connected the Pennsylvania cities of Philadelphia and Lancaster. Okay, so we do have the distance there and both of the turnpikes mentioned. So that's a pretty decent one. We'll keep it in the running. The Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike was the first private turnpike in the United States. A fun fact, but nothing about the distance, so we can go ahead and eliminate that one. The Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike, which connected 2 Pennsylvania cities, was built between 1792 and 1794. Okay, nothing about the distance, just about some dates it was built, so we know it can't be that one. A historic Pennsylvania road, the Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike, was completed in 1794. Okay, nothing about the distance, so A is our best choice. And we wasted 0 time looking through these notes because all of these notes are in these answer choices. So all we have to do is work through elimination. Tip number 4 is to use the value tags and contrast hack on data problems. So we have this data problem of this bar chart here, and our question is asking us which choice best describes the data in the graph that support Ben's and colleagues' conclusion. Okay, so before I even ask myself what is this conclusion, I'm just going to get a sense of the value in the tags and if we have any contrast in this chart. So, home heating needs met with subsurface thermal pollution for 2 temperature conditions by percentage of sites. So what are those 2 temperature conditions? That would be our tags, current surface temperature and maximum plausible surface temperature. So I'm just going to focus on current and maximum here. Those are 2 kind of different contrasting ideas there. I also am seeing a contrast in our local heating needs met. So we have 0%, up to 25%, and more than 25%. And I'm seeing that at 0%, our current surface temperature is at 80%, and at more than 25%, our maximum goes up to about that same value. And on our y-axis, it's saying percent of all sites analyzed. So these y values here are all percentages. So I'm sure we're going to see some sort of relationship between these 2 bars, but let's take a look. So as I'm reading through this passage, my ears are going to perk when I see something about a conclusion. Urbanization, industrialization, and the warming climate create thermal pollution in the shallow subsurface soil. Suzanne A. Benz and colleagues analyzed thousands of sites on 3 continents under one scenario in which surface temperature remains at the current level and under another in which the surface reaches the maximum plausible temperature. They then categorized each site according to the percentage of local home heating needs that could be met using this excess subsurface heat. The team concluded, oh, that's exciting, that if the surface temperature approaches the maximum plausible level, so we're looking for maximum plausible level, the percentage of sites where thermal pollution could feasibly contribute to meeting home needs will increase. Percentage increase, so percentage of meeting home heating needs will increase. Okay, so let's just take a look at this graph before we even look at our answer choices and make sure that this graph proves that conclusion. So looking at my graph, I see automatically that the local heating needs were met at more than 25% here with this maximum plausible surface temperature, right? At 80%, about 80%, that happened. Okay, so we're going to eliminate our answer choices that aren't coinciding with that finding here. So A, under both temperature conditions, less than 10% of sites were in the up to 25% group. But at the maximum plausible surface temperature, almost 80% of sites could have all their local heating needs met by thermal pollution. Okay, so under both temperature conditions, less than 10% of sites were in the up to 25% group. That's true. But at the maximum plausible surface temperature, almost 80% of sites could have all their local heating needs met by thermal pollution. So we do see that this is less than 10% here, but there is nothing that tells us that all of their local heating needs would be met by thermal pollution, because again, we're only seeing that local heating needs are met at more than 25%. So that's pretty far away from that all. We want to stay away from those absolutes as much as we can. So we're going to eliminate that one. At current surface temperatures, more than 80% of the sites have no need for supplemental local home heating from subsurface thermal pollution. But at maximum plausible surface temperature, more than 70% of sites exhibit significantly greater home heating needs. Okay, so answer choice B has actually nothing to do with this graph, right? We have no idea what the need for supplemental local home heating is. That's not what this graph is showing us, so we're going to eliminate that. At current surface temperatures, more than 80% of sites can meet, at most, 25% of local home heating needs with subsurface thermal pollution. But at the maximum plausible surface temperature, more than 80% of sites can meet greater than 25% of local home heating needs. Okay, so let's take this first sentence apart. At the current surface temperatures, so our gray, more than 80% of sites can meet, at most, 25% of local home needs. So current surface temperature, more than 25, at most, 25%, total totally not, right? That's at about 5%. So definitely not 80%. So automatically, I'm not even going to keep going. I know that that's wrong. And D, hopefully this one's right because it's our last one. At current surface temperatures, more than 80% of sites cannot use subsurface thermal pollution to meet any portion of local home heating needs. But at the maximum plausible surface temperature, that percentage drops below 20%. Okay, so at current surface temperatures, light gray, more than 80% of sites cannot use subsurface thermal pollution to meet any portion of local home heating needs. So cannot means 0%, right? So yep, we're seeing that on that tag. That's good. But when we move to the maximum plausible surface temperature, which is right here, we see that the current surface temperature drops below that 20% line. So that is also proven, which would support the conclusion that if surface temperature approaches this maximum plausible surface level, it could increase the local heating needs of these people on this site. So that supports the evidence. And that is how we break down this graph before we even read our questions or our paragraphs. And our final tip for today, tip number 5, is use the 3C strategies for writing and language questions. So these are our punctuation questions. Now, what are the 3Cs? Are these complete thoughts? Are we dealing with 2 independent clauses or complete sentences and probably making a compound sentence or separating it into 2 sentences? This is the number one of these 3Cs. If we can figure out if we're dealing with 2 independent clauses or not, we usually can eliminate at least 1 or 2 answer choices. Is there a correction to be made? Do I think that there is some sort of grammar or punctuation problem happening here? Or do I think that we don't need any punctuation and we just need the words? And then obviously we're going to cross out or eliminate our wrong answers. So let's look at this question here. Which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? Again, another question format that is always going to be punctuation. So if you see conventions of standard English, pause, don't keep reading the question, and just go ahead and let's jump in to the paragraph. So with punctuation questions, we actually don't have to bother reading the paragraph. We're just going to start with our sentence. Evidence imprints the sand, maybe and, thousands of steps taken by shoes and paws. So looking through my answer choices, I'm seeing a colon, a comma, and a fanboy, a semicolon, and a period. So automatically off the bat, I'm already seeing that B, C, and D are all separating independent clauses. B and C are making compound sentences, and D is just separating the 2 sentences. So if I can prove to myself that these are not 2 independent clauses, I can pretty much eliminate all 3 of these. So, first sentence, evidence imprints the sand. Evidence is our subject. What is the evidence doing? It's imprinting. Thousands of steps taken by shoes and paws. Okay, that is not a complete sentence. I'm missing a verb. So, off the bat, 1, 2, and 3 are wrong. So, I'm only left with this colon. And why does the colon work? Because it is giving us more explanation about what the imprints are. Evidence imprints the sand. What evidence? Thousands of steps taken by shoes and paws. So just by doing the first step in the 3Cs and doing our elimination, I can very quickly get to A as our answer choice because it's the only one that's not making a compound sentence. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope those tips helped. If you're really serious about raising your PSAT score, click the link down below to speak to one of our advisors and get $200 off your first tutoring package.